Good afternoon. I'm Jim Sheehan, Board Chair for USA Swimming. At last year's convention, the House of Delegates passed legislation to make substantial changes to the structure and function of the Board of Directors and organizational operations. This Saturday, delegates will vote for candidates to be seated on this new, smaller, and more strategic board. As an organization, we are changing, evolving, and hopefully transforming. Our meetings, workshops, and discussions this week in Jacksonville are focused on navigating the course ahead, the theme for this year's convention. Not only did the convention planners give us a theme for the first time, they also searched for a keynote speaker who could help us not only place change in a larger context, but also give us ideas on how to deal with change and use it to transform our lives, personally, in our work life, in our businesses, and in our governance. It is my pleasure to introduce that speaker, Rishad Tobaccowala, a self-described reinventor, futurist, and transformation catalyst. He's a globally renowned speaker, provoking and inspiring companies and organizations to remain relevant in a transformative world. Rishad is the Chief Growth Officer and member of the Management Committee of the Publicis Group, the world's third largest communications firm with 80,000 employees. He has 35 years of experience in marketing and has worked for, helped grow, or co-founded a variety of companies, including Leo Burnett, Starcom, SMG Next, Giant Step, Play, and Denu. Based in Chicago, though rarely there, he has keynoted at events around the world for major marketers like Procter & Gamble, Heineken, my personal favorite, and Delta, technology platforms like Google and Facebook, and major marketing and advertising trade groups such as Interactive Advertising Bureau, Association of National Advertisers, and the American Association of Advertising Agencies. We are fortunate to have him here with us today to share his insights and suggestions on thriving in transformative times. Please join me in welcoming Rishad Tobaccowala.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. You all are guinea pigs because this is the first time this is being tried, and hopefully we will survive this experiment in the next hour or so. So I'm going to be talking about transformation and about change, and I'm going to start with a very, very broad satellite view of what is going on. And as I proceed speaking, I will bring it closer and closer and closer down to what you all are doing, and then down to you as an individual, though there are quite a few hundred individuals in this room. This is a presentation without any slides or any video. So if you want to fall asleep, you can. If you wish to take notes, you could too, but this is going to basically just be me on the stage telling you a story. And broadly, the story begins with what is change? So let's start with that, because we are thinking about navigating, guiding, and dealing with change. So what is it? I will tell you one thing it is. Change sucks. Okay? So when someone comes to me and says, change is good, I tell them, I am happy the way I am. If you wish to change, go ahead. Why do you want me to change? You said change is good, you change. Let me tell you how much I hate change. I have worked for the same two bosses for 21 years of my career. So in 35 years, for 21 years, I worked for one of two bosses. And each of them retired on me. Otherwise, I would have continued to work for them. I worked for the very same company for 36. I've lived in the same city for 38. And I knew my wife, and both of us were 12 years old, which was almost 48 years ago. I hate change. Simultaneously, I have been involved in helping dozens of companies and firms around the world, impacting tens of thousands of people from China to India to Europe on change. So this is quite ridiculous, right? Someone who hates it, advising people on how to do it. Well, that's because what I learned was the more things you want to stay the same, the more you will have to change. And therefore, if you got a good thing going, the only way to keep it is to change. Because if you don't, you will be cut off from the good thing. In my career, I'm now probably in the building that I work in, which is 3,000 employees, the longest tenured employee. Now, it could be one of two things. I learned how to change or I'm completely unemployable. I hope it's the first and not the second, but who knows, okay? And the reason was, all along, I started doing new things and learning new things. And my colleagues would tell me, what the hell are you doing? And I'd say, no, if we want to keep relevant, we have to do this. And I did, and they didn't. And I still have my job, and they don't. So that's the key thing with change. Change sucks because when you do something new, you don't know what you're doing. Change sucks because you get used to certain things, and there's no reason for you to change. And when you all are successful, at whatever level you all are, people expect you to succeed, people expect you to win, and people expect you to deliver the goods. But when you first learned how to cycle, in fact, when you first probably learned how to swim, I don't think you had sort of an immaculate cycle or an immaculate swim. You probably almost drowned and you fell because you were learning something. And anytime you do something new, you don't exactly know what's going on. The more successful you get, the less you want to do that because you don't want to look silly because everyone around you says, I knew the person was a loser, I'm just waiting for them to prove it. And when you change, you don't do that well, and therefore you prove it. But all that you prove is the other person doesn't know how to change and you will succeed. So don't worry about it. But change is all around us, and that's where I'm going to first start with this satellite view of global change. I'll bring it down, I promise you, but I need to think about global change. And the reason is each one of us, whether we are individuals, whether we are working at our swim clubs, in our jobs, or at any level, want to make sure that we continue to succeed and we continue to win. And winning is about competition, which only you know only too well. But how do you compete and win in the future? And this, I'm not talking clearly about swimming, which I know nothing about outside of the fact that I do swim twice a week. But I've never won anything, and in fact, but how do you actually win as people? And that is, you need future competitive advantage. Not just an advantage today, but an advantage tomorrow. And companies and people and individuals and institutions that only have an advantage on what's going on today will not win in the future. If that was true, we'd still have Kodak, right? If that was true, we'd still have Oldsmobile. When I grew up and I was marketing on Oldsmobile, there was a year, less than 20 years ago, where the Oldsmobile Cutlass was the #1 selling car in America, with 1 million cars. Oldsmobile as a brand name does not exist. You know the story of Kodak. And company after company, institution after institution, suddenly disappears. And if you look at each of them, what you realize is individuals in that company, individuals in that community sat like a frog in boiling water till they basically were no good excepting for a French meal. And that means not for them to be eat, but they were eaten. And that's happening today because there are three trends all around the world that are unstoppable. And those three trends are impacting you all. And you'll see it, but I'm going to sort of bring it alive a little bit. The first trend is globalization. The world is basically global, and globalization cannot be stopped. Today, there is a lot of backlash against globalization, not just in the United States with trade wars, or in Britain with Brexit, and a lot of other things. But there is a real concern about globalization, and a good concern, because globalization has winners and globalization has losers. And overall, since 1991 to now, 2 billion people have come out of poverty because of globalization. But at the very same stage, manufacturing jobs in Western countries have been under massive pressure. If you are a shareholder or you are working for a global company, you benefit. If you are not a shareholder, you are not working for a global company, and you happen to live in the United States or in Britain, you may not benefit. And therefore, there are losses and there are gains. And those have to be rectified with all kinds of things, from trying to bring back jobs to education to a lot of other things, retraining. But globalization itself cannot be stopped because it did bring 2 billion people out of poverty. And there's another reason. The reason is the entire United States and Western Europe combined are 850 million people. I'm a US citizen. I've now lived twice as long in the US as I did in India, where I grew up. India has 1.2 billion. China has 1.2 billion. Africa has 1.2 billion. 3.6 billion, 850 million. Hey, if this was an election, globalization would win. So globalization cannot be stopped because of what we call demographic shifts. So the second big shift is demographic shifts. And demographic shifts are all over us. I'm giving you first two countries before I come to the United States, because this is the US Swimming Association and US Swimming, right? But I want to go global for a reason. Japan today, its population between now and 2050 will decline by 33%. Between 2050 and 2100, it will decline by 66%. So Japan will have less than 40 million people. It was 100 million plus population, less than 40 million people by 2100. The continent of Africa has 1 billion people today. By 2050, it will have 2 billion, and by 2100, it will have 4 billion. And those are set in stone. That's going to happen. It's a combination of fertility and youth. Africa is a young country, very fertile. The Japanese, the men don't seem to like the women. They prefer dolls, right, and toys. Really, it's true, okay? And they don't allow immigrants in because they're an island and you have a net decline in population. And therefore, the countries are very different. The two countries I'm very familiar with besides the United States are China and India. I spend a lot of time there. There's a very big difference between China and India. Yes, they're both in Asia, they both have 1 billion people. But the biggest difference is not that one's a democracy and one is not. The difference is the average age in China is tending towards 40, while 2/3 of Indians are younger than 25 years old. And so when you have a one-child policy, you have amazing things going on in the Chinese society just based on that demographic shift. Now let's come to the United States. Yesterday, the Wall Street Journal had an article on Generation Z. So Generation Z, some of you all are in this room. Most of you all are not Generation Z because you have to be born 21 years ago. So if you were between 13 and 21 years old, you're Generation Z. Generation Z is extremely different than Generation Y. We just went one generation below. Generation Y wants to basically work for themselves. Generation Z, who grew up in 2008, 2009, says forget about it. Generation Y has got a lot of college debt. Generation Z says, I'm not going to do that. Generation Z does everything on the phone. They, however, have a problem talking to people face to face. Very interesting. But here's the big difference. When you looked at baby boomers, 14% or 15% of baby boomers were non-Caucasian. 44% of Generation G are non-Caucasian. Now let's get to the United States overall. Forget about Generation Z. If you are 12 years or younger in the United States, Caucasian minority. I'm not talking about the state of Florida or Texas or California. So the 12-year-old today is more likely to be Asian, Hispanic, African American than they're likely to be European or American. That's for real. That's one of the big issues that you'll have, which is, are you all becoming irrelevant if you are not actually becoming reflective of what today's 12-year-old is? And over the next 5 years, everyone under 18 will be Caucasian minority. And you can't, and I can't, and no one can do anything about it unless one decides to have some ethnic cleansing. And those are realities. And that's why when people say, I don't want to stop change, my stuff is, it's happening around. And that is a very, very big challenge for everybody, institutions, companies, etc. And the third change, not surprising, is technological change. And technological change is a huge deal. And to give you the idea of how much of a huge deal it is, I'm going to pull out two things. This is a Samsung 9 phone. And this has, among other things, 2 times the processing power of the first space shuttle. Okay? This is the new iPhone XS, which came out 4 days ago. It has 2.5 times the processing power of the first space shuttle. February 2018, September 2018. Okay. On this, I can live my entire life, connect for free to my friends in India, become a network broadcasting station, buy anything, call an Uber, and take selfies and irritate people. Right? What this has given all of us when we are at home is godlike power. If I were to describe to you what you do with devices like this or earlier devices, you would basically say to me, you are insane. If I talked to you 10 years ago and I said, here's what I'm doing, this is the guy is insane, hallucinating, science fiction. Or you would say, whoever had that has godlike power. Your society, the people who come to your swimming clubs, because particularly the swimmers are younger, have godlike power. The way they communicate, the way they learn, the way they check things is completely different than 10 to 15 years ago, because you yourselves are completely different than 10 to 15 years ago. So you basically have incredible demographic shifts, incredible global shifts, at incredible shifts in technology, which basically are changing society broadly. And as a result of which, what you all do in this association as teachers, as coaches, as referees, as specialists, as administrators, and as people has changed a lot and is changing a lot, and which is one of the reasons why we all have to change, because we can't avoid it. These three things are for real and they're happening. So what are some of the things one should think about, and what are some of the things that one should really look through? So one, which is without a doubt, is there, like you all are doing in cities like Chicago and other places, there has to be a major emphasis on diversity of every type. Because without diversity, to a great extent, institutions become irrelevant. Because in effect, if success is future competitive advantage, you have to basically recognize that if you all don't change, someone will basically say, we are going to be the clubs, and we are going to be the people for the next generation. And you do not want to be Kodak and let someone else be Instagram. You have to be Instagram while you're also Kodak. And that's one that's very, very important to keep in mind, is that you have to speak to that diversity. And diversity is not just of ethnicity. Diversity clearly is of gender and now genders. Okay. Diversity has to also basically diversity of mindset, diversity of social and other backgrounds, because to a great extent, one of the key things that set certain sports which were less diverse to become a little bit more diverse were role models. And I remember, because I'm old enough to see how golf changed with Tiger Woods and how tennis changed with the Williams sisters. And in reality, unless one is, and I'm, by the way, an older person, more like probably the majority of this room, okay? But keeping fresh and keeping new isn't a number of how old you are. It's whether you're willing to learn new things or not learn new things, whether you're willing to do new things or not do new things. And I've seen 25-year-olds who are aged compared to me, and I've seen 80-year-olds who are young compared to me. So it's a mindset that is very, very important to keep in mind. The second is to recognize that everything is now going to become an event and an experience, which you are also doing. People are now living causes, and clearly the passion that people have for swimming, etc., but they're also living experiences. If you sort of look at other events, just think about this. The competition for time and for people to join the sport or spend time with the sport is not only all sports, but including a new crazy thing called electronic sports. When there was a game called Fortnite that came out, 1 billion people were on simultaneously during 1 week. I don't know what the hell they were doing, but they were on. Right? And so my whole stuff is like, these people are insane. But I had to go to see the insanity, and now I have confirmed that they're all insane. But one had to go see it, okay, which is particularly interesting. But everything is becoming an event. Part of the reason why everything is becoming an event is this. If you think about what people are sharing on social media, and a lot of stuff, they share three things. The first thing they share is a very nicely curated part of their life. So if you see most other people's life, you feel like a loser, because everybody seems to be doing very elegant and beautiful things, looking very elegant and beautiful. Okay, we know that. That's all fake, because we all do that too, right? There's a second part of it, is where they're actually connecting with friends and connecting on life events. Birthdays, graduations, deaths, pets dying. When I spoke with Facebook, I said you shouldn't call yourself Facebook, you should call yourself Lifebook. Okay? Because it really is it's an analogy of life if you actually look at it. And it's true for other social media, WeChat, etc. But the third thing is they're basically sharing events and experiences, concerts and sports and a whole bunch of other things. If you today go, and it's been changing year after year after year, but any sporting event today, the thing around the sport is far more interesting than the sport. I'm not necessarily saying that's what you all should do, because that's pretty crazy. But I know that lots of people go to basketball games for all the hoopla around the basketball game and have no clue what the hell's going on in the basketball game, to a great extent. But we have become events and experiences, and therefore everything that you do has to think about that. I'm not saying you should make everything an event and an experience, but recognize that people have become sensitized to events and experiences, and I know that's one of the driving goals that you all are basically working on. So diversity clearly is one. Events and is another one. The third is what I call leakage. And leakage is what you control is a small part of what the overall experience of swimming might be. And you have to recognize where you fit and how everything leaks into each other. And if you can't influence everything, you can influence nothing. So, to a great extent, you have to be something different in the future. And that I'm going to talk about 2 diseases. Some of you are old enough to remember a name of an amazing, brilliant gentleman called Andy Grove. And Andy Grove was one of the drivers of Intel, a little chip company. And Andy Grove had a line in a book where he basically said, only the paranoid will survive. Okay? That worked. But it worked in a time which wasn't linked, networked, and connected as we are today. Today, Intel's paranoia made it miss the entire mobile phone world. Intel chips don't power mobile phones. ARM does. Qualcomm does. Apple does. Why? Because when you are paranoid, you see everybody as the enemy and all change is difficult. And paranoia is not the disease to have. The disease that you all need to have is schizophrenia. Okay? So my basic belief is not only the paranoid will survive, but only the schizophrenic will thrive. So let me talk to you a little bit about schizophrenia. And again, this is an analogy. I obviously recognize it as a major disease, and I'm not making any fun of the disease, but I'm just using the word paranoia and schizophrenia in that statement. The key thing today is all of you all have to balance today and tomorrow. One of the lines I use is, new brooms sweep clean, old brooms know the corners. And whenever organizations like yours are changing, just like my organization, there is a grappling between the new and the old, between what worked and what one is trying. And true success is how do you basically balance today and tomorrow? How do you make sure that you recognize the importance of your roots, but do not forget that you need wings all the time? And how do you combine roots and wings? How do you combine old and new? How do you combine the best of what has been with what can be? And once in a while, the old will overwhelm the new because it's the right thing to do. And often, the new will overwhelm the old because the world has changed. People have changed, technology has changed, and competitors have changed. I'm going to leave this particular industry and go to one that we all are aware of. And that is one of the key things that have happened because of this is a lot of new companies have come in. So a very successful company One of our clients is Procter & Gamble. And Procter & Gamble is better known to most people as the maker of Tide and Crest and Pampers, among other things. They also spent, about a decade ago, $57 billion buying Gillette. And in Gillette, there were two brands. There was Gillette, all the Gillette brands, and there was Duracell, the battery. Okay? P&G, without a doubt, is probably the best marketing company in the world. And they are driven by consumers, they're driven by research, they're driven by data. About a year ago, I spoke at P&G, and it was the same day when they were having a board meeting, and outside investors basically put board members on because they thought P&G management did not know how to run P&G. And the reason they gave was a little brand that nobody paid attention to for many years. And that little brand was called Dollar Shave Club. Gillette lost 20% of its market share to a brand they did not see coming. A brand that did not advertise on television. A brand that did not have distribution on Walmart. A brand that did not spend millions of dollars on production value. A brand that did funny commercials on YouTube and used word of mouth on Facebook. The fastest growing billionaire in the United States is a 21-year-old woman. And when many years ago my tutors told me to pay attention to these people, I thought I had brought them up badly because the people they wanted to pay attention to were called the Kardashian sisters. Kylie Jenner is the fastest billionaire, and she's 21. You know what the product she has put out there? Kylie Cosmetics, lipstick. She sold $900 million of product in 18 months. How many employees do you think Kylie Jenner Cosmetics has? 5. How much media advertising do they do? 0. They just use Kylie Jenner's Instagram account. How many people follow Kylie Jenner? 120 million, which is more than the ratings of the top 15 television shows in America. L'Oreal's paying attention. All of you at some stage are using Uber or Lyft. Uber doesn't compete with Lyft. Lyft doesn't compete with Uber. They do, but they really don't. You know what they want you to do? They don't want you to buy a car. The real competitor is the car companies because they're saying, why the hell do you need a car? If someone comes, and it's particularly true in urban areas, not suburban, ex-urban, you're all from all over, but in urban areas, like in Chicago, when I drive my car and I put it for valet parking at a restaurant, I basically buy my wife a meal, myself a meal, and my car a meal. Because there's $30 to park with valet parking by the time the tip is done. Why do I want to do that when it costs me $6 an Uber? So one of the key things, interestingly, is General Motors, or rather BMW, Audi, and Mercedes banded together to buy a company called Year Maps because they believe mapping is a big part of the future of transportation. And people are increasingly talking about, are we in the car business or are we in the business of moving people around? So you're beginning to understand that the competition for time and effort never comes from the people you think you're paying attention to. Which is one of the reasons why A, you constantly need new blood, and B, you got to always question yourself and be schizophrenic. Because the reality of it is BMW and Mercedes and Audi, they better make really good, expensive cars if they're to stay in business today. But if that's all that they do, they will sooner or later not be in business. As you all know only too well, because you all teach them, many of you of them are here, There was a rite of passage in America called getting a car when you were 16. That rite of passage, while still existing, has declined by a third in the last 10 years. Because people say, why do I need that? Which is particularly interesting. This thing also is the company that is going to put Nikon and Canon out of business. For those of you, when you all get it, and it includes the iPhone R, so it doesn't have to be the X Max, they have something in there called computational photography. You will now take better pictures than a DSLR. It's come to that. And the reason I say all of this is primarily because we see all of this in our lives, but sometimes we don't see this in what we currently do. And it's one of the key things that I advise people. I cannot advise you on how to do anything with regard to swimming or how to run anything, but I do say, make sure you balance today and tomorrow, and make sure you recognize that tomorrow is coming faster than you think, and it's very different than today, in parts, but not all parts. So you have to learn two things: what to learn and what to unlearn. And the unlearning is the difficult thing. All of you all are grappling. Part of it is you are resisting change because it's the right thing to do. Because some of it may be going at the roots, some of it may be going at the legacy stuff. But some of the time you'll resist change is because it's very hard to unlearn things. And only you all can figure out individually, in your own clubs, locally, as well as above. The other schizophrenia is it's got to be both, global and local. Because it's no longer either or, it's both. I believe one of the single biggest issues that are facing everywhere in the world is people are saying, I'm right, you're wrong, or somebody says, you're right, I'm wrong, which is called polarization. The problem simply is none of us know what the hell we're doing, so we're both right and wrong. That's the reality, that's human. Nobody knows for sure, so you have to do both, which is right and wrong. What I would now like to talk a little bit about is what I sort of see along with the fact that this unlearning and this whole idea of balancing, the idea of diversity, the idea of events, the idea of thinking broadly with regard to the society, all of which you all are basically doing, is two other big areas. The first one is, how do you make sure that you remain relevant to tomorrow's swimmers? And the second is, how do you make sure you remain relevant yourself? Because over the years, the key thing I have learned as I've gone and consulted with and worked with companies is people have basically said to me, and I have the opportunity to meet people all over the world, and I love drinking beer. Okay, so I take people and we have draft beer. This particularly works out with the German companies or the Czech companies, right? So we sit there. And I asked them, this is two leaders like you all, what's bothering you? I used to ask them, what's bothering you? But now I say, what's bothering you about your business? Okay? Because what's bothering you took us into different places. So what's bothering you about business? Or what's bothering you about running the club? Or what's bothering you about, US swimming? And I can tell you now, I don't have to ask the question. Though I ask the question, I will tell you what the three answers are. Number one, I do not know exactly what's going on in the world. It doesn't seem to make sense. Is there a way to frame and understand this? Because there's so much noise, there's so much speed, there's so much change. What in the world is going on? So that's one, which is, I'm dazed and confused and I'm pretending that I'm not. Okay? Because most of us are dazed and confused and we have to pretend that we're not, otherwise we'll fall apart. But the whole idea is I'm dazed and confused, which is number one. The second one, is I'm not sure I have the right partners, the right procedures, and the right things in my organization. Which, that's when they talk to me. I don't know if you're the right company to deal with and partner with, but they also say they don't know if their own companies are organized right, designed right. One of the lines I basically have is the future does not fit in the containers of the past, right? And to a great extent, if we think about it, we have organizations that are organized one way, the future is going this way, and we try to keep pushing it back into one way, but that's no longer necessarily true. So everywhere, companies, institutions, organizations are struggling with organizational design, organizational leadership, organizational rules. Same things you all are. It's all over the world, all across companies. But the third, and so that on that relevance is how do they remain relevant also to their customers. And the third one is, after 3 or 4 drinks, hey, I don't know if I'm relevant anymore. That always comes, always. And these are with leaders, right? I'm not sure that I myself am relevant because the world has changed. What do you do? Now, this is where I have a big advantage because I'm supposed to know all this new stuff. And they look at me and they say, you're graying. How the hell do you know this? Because aren't only young people or technology-driven people or code writers supposed to know all this? But you do. And I said, look, I'm just like you. I just try to figure it out. So I'll show you how that gets done. Let me talk about 2 and 3 and then stop there. So 2, which is the area about making sure that you all are relevant to tomorrow's swimmers, which will move to 3, is I believe that the way people communicate today is different in how, but not different in what. And we sometimes confuse the how with the what. So for instance, the what is people have always wanted and have always needed that they are appreciated, people treat them with respect, and you listen to them. And what they're asking for is, can I trust you? And why that is extremely important, as you know today, with the emphasis you all have on things like safe sport, is this: if there is one thing in the world that is breaking down, is trust. And it's not just because of fake news or not fake news. Okay? It's basically everyone has a story and everyone is a media company. And so the whole idea of trust becomes the single biggest thing. I believe companies, institutions, organizations, and people who have trust will win. But how do you get trust? And trust is extremely human. Trust is not a machine-made thing. Trust is not something that you can run an algorithm on. So the what is about trust and about emotion, and it's about stories. The how has changed a lot. You can communicate the how using modern media like never before. It doesn't have to be. So when some people basically say, I don't understand how, so it's the how and the what. And so the how has changed a lot, and the what has become actually more and more human. The how has become more technology and data-driven than ever before. And that's, again, a form of schizophrenia or balance, which is how do you combine the how with the what. So you should always ask, when you are dealing with and interacting with and remaining relevant with the swimmers of tomorrow, is the roots of what you know about training and inspiration and persistence and discipline and life skills, those still are true. How you communicate it and how that happens, some of it is changing. And the how and the what is, and what I get very irritated with is some of the world's best people like yourselves are so good at the what, but still use some of the old how, which basically allows a bunch of bullshit operators who know how to do how to fool people with the wrong what. And what you're seeing today in society is modern how beating good old-fashioned what. My whole stuff is what and how need to combine. It's the message and the messenger, the substance and the style. And I will tell you that we're living in a modern world where the style matters. Which is why I'm now going to lead you with what are some of the things that I've learned as an old, decrepit person to remain relevant. Okay? This is what I've learned. But some of what I've learned and how I do it has been useful to people all over the world. And so therefore I told you I'd land the plane, which is how does someone who hates change still have a job and relatively successful? So number one, and this is particularly true in this new world, is you have to spend 1 hour a day learning. Obviously, I'm talking to people who basically train people or people who spend 4, 5, 6, 7 hours in a pool. So most people say 1 hour a day. What the hell are you talking about? In other industries, you all might say, like, I don't have time to do that. But you need to spend at least 1 hour a day learning new things. Because if you do not learn new things, you are, without you knowing it, you are becoming outmoded. We spend a lot of time making sure our bodies are in good shape, or at least in your case, for the people who you all are training, etc. If you think about how much time all around the Western world, and now increasingly in India and China, we spend time about exercise and food. And do you know what makes us different than an animal? It's not our bodies, it's our minds. When we invented fire, more energy went to our brains versus our stomach, which is why man became man and we were not a monkey. But we spend most of our time thinking about monkey-like stuff. And so my whole stuff is, have you thought about what you put in your mind and how you use your mind versus just what you put in your stomach and how much you exercise your body? You know this is true because that's the way you train your people, because it's mental and other discipline. And this is how you work. But we never do it to ourselves, which is how much time, how do we actually build our own minds? And which is why I say 1 hour a day, and I to this day do it. Like this morning, because it happens to be Eastern time, so I get a thing. I get up at 4:30 Chicago time, right? And I work for an hour and a half, and this is not like working on like work, it's learning some new things. And I have to do it an hour and a half because I'm a dumbass. I take more time than most people, right? But I give people like, hey, look, it's like it's an hour. It doesn't have to be like, no one has to be getting up at 4:30. It doesn't have to be all one day, but about 7 hours a week, 30 hours a month. That's the general gist of it. Okay. What are some of the things that you should learn? Learn anything that upsets you. So if something upsets you, write it down. Because when something upsets you, it'll upset you for one of two reasons. It'll upset you because it's so insane that you want to kill the other person, or it upsets you because you don't know what the hell they're talking about. And then you don't have to even tell anybody. All of you all have the Library of Alexandria. It's called a web browser, right? Bing it, Google it, do whatever you want, and you can learn about it. And as you do that and you ask people about it, you become extremely interesting and relevant. So one is continuously train on things that you want to learn and know about, because if you do that, people actually get inspired. People basically say, regardless of how old you are, all of you all are successful. If you keep working at new things, it allows something else. It allows you to oppose new things if you understand new things. So one of the things I do in my company is I kill off about 50% of the new ideas by yelling and screaming. What people don't say is the guy doesn't understand the new thing. They just say he's stupid, which is a different thing. But the argument isn't about, do I understand new things? The argument is about something different. And what you'll find in organizations, in what you'll do with your folks, that's extremely important. Another thing that is extremely important and I'm not sure how many of you all do this, is the new way to communicate is social media. And it's especially true among young people. I will give you the extent to which this has worked. When social media first appeared, I was 50 years old. And originally what people were doing was taking photographs of the food they were eating and showing it off to everybody, if you remember that. And my initial reaction was, I've never seen such a bunch of losers in my life. Why the hell do I want to do this? Right? My next reaction was, if this is the new media, I'm glad I'm closer to being dead than being born. A younger person in my company, who I remember this, his name is Shiv Singh, and this is about 15, 20 years ago. No, 10 years ago, sorry, not 20 years ago, this thing happened 10 years ago, came into my office and said, I've just written a book, and I think you need to read it. And he's actually written this book, and you can go find it. You know those yellow books, yellow and black books? It was called Social Media for Dummies. And he basically said, you are a dummy if you don't do this. Please read it. And he was basically working for someone who was working for someone who was reporting to me. So he was like 2 levels below. He said, yeah, Social Media for Dummies. And I said, okay, fine, whatever. And the reason I think about him is just now he's writing another book, and I was writing a blurb for it, and I was thinking of like saying something stupid. But one of the key things is I began to learn about these things, about Twitter and Facebook and even Google Plus when it was around. And because I'm global, I used WhatsApp and WeChat and everything else. It has been the single most influential way for me to influence, you know whom? My company. I can communicate more with the 80,000 people inside my group, particularly the young people, so anybody who's basically 35 and below, with this than any other mechanism. More importantly, they actually think I know what I'm talking about just because I'm using these things. Right? All of a sudden they say, you're the only person in management who uses any of this. So even though you're like a rotten person, my God, you're trying to be cool, at least you're trying. And I will tell you this, that each one of them have massive superpowers. So one way to think how modern this is each of you all are going to be given an assignment to go see a movie. If you all have not seen it, the movie you want to go see is called Searching. It's out in the theaters right now. Okay? And Searching was developed and conceived by a 30-year-old. The entire movie, you're watching a computer screen, but you don't know it soon, very soon. Every single thing, every form of communication is on a computer screen or a phone. So, you've got like FaceTime and Google Hangouts and everything else. And it's a very simple story of someone who happens to be in school, high school, who goes missing. And her father is trying to find her and is using all modern social media, Google search, etc., to find her. And the entire movie is in social media. I went with my daughters, and because I'm older, my daughters are also old to a certain extent. They're 30 and 27. And they were looking at it and they said, oh my God, this thing is exactly the way we all live. And I was looking at it saying, this is very cool. They said, this is the way we live. And I could basically understand it. But society has changed so dramatically that we don't even actually think about it. You just think about everything you basically sort of have. And part of the reason why you're beginning to see that is increasingly you're going to have society where people are going to be now talking to each other. When I think about globalization, think about sports. The single biggest, it's not, hopefully one day it'll be swimming, but today the world's biggest sport is football/soccer, global soccer, right? What we call soccer, American football. And the biggest event is the World Cup. The World Cup this year was in Russia. What do you think the #1 app was? It had nothing to do with sports. It was Google Translate. you can actually now speak to Google and it will translate in real time in languages. So if you're thinking about how global it's going to be, your athletes are going to be able to communicate with everybody without having to know the other language. So a lot of people say their kids are learning Mandarin. I said, I'd rather that they basically learn how to use Alexa. By the time they learn Mandarin, machines will basically do the translating interface. And why that is extremely important is I learned over the years how to use all of these, and they became very powerful. So while I do swim, it's not a passion like the way all of you all have a passion for swimming. So my passion is movies and film and technology. Okay? I know a lot about movies, fashion, and technology. I mean, movies, film, and technology, because I actually curate my own list on Twitter. I don't necessarily have to see all the crazy stuff on Twitter. I basically find out who are the most amazing technologists, most amazing writers, and they tweet. And I follow who they tweet. And I have my own line of amazing stuff that's going on film, amazing stuff that's going on stuff. The world's best anybody is available for free online using social media. The world's best everybody. And so the whole idea is those kinds of training are becoming very, very important. And it's one of the reasons why I tell people, hey, look, you should spend time making sure that you utilize all of these. So one is definitely utilize social media in a very big way. And for whatever comfort you have, and you don't have to basically think about anything but whatever your passion is. If it's fishing, right? If it's whatever it is, if you start looking at it, you're going to see entire lives. And the reason I know it, because where it's going is becoming even more powerful. Part of my learning is to anticipate what's going to come next. The single biggest thing that's going to basically come next over time is, and towards sort of swimming and other kinds of stuff, is increasingly there's going to be a blend of man and machine, or woman and machine. And we are beginning to see it with better and better equipment. We're sort of seeing it for those of you who have seen the fact that a Apple Watch can now do an EKG that is accepted by the FDA. Yes, an EKG at home when accepted by the FDA. And sooner these things are becoming smaller. So remember, like little ear pods you've got, they'll be embedded. And all of this is coming within 3 years. What implications does that have for training? What implication does that have for sports? It's pretty interesting. I mean, it's the world that's coming, because the big three things, as I've sort of explained to people about in sections as part of my learning, is the second part of learning is being able to tell yourself and the people you are convincing and the people you are training, which you only know too well, stories. I've described the last 20 years in technology with a very simple story, saying there were 3 ages of connection. There was the first age of connection, which started in 1995. In 1995, you had the World Wide Web, the Netscape browser, for those of you who remember, and there was a little company called Google that was born. And in those days, the way the connection was, you basically had a page, you clicked on a link, and you got to another link. Yahoo decided the way they would organize it is they had a librarian deciding where the links went. There were 2 students who dropped out of a PhD program at Stanford who basically were looking at their academic papers and beginning to realize that when an academic paper had a citation for some other paper, and many papers cited the same paper, that meant that paper was particularly seminal. Just like a particular race might be particular seminal, a particular game might be seminal. They said, why don't we run an algorithm that basically says that when someone's looking for something, we send them to the page that has the most links. And that was basically a theorem called PageRank. Larry Page and Sergey Brin wrote it. And that basically became one of the 5 most valuable companies in America. In 2007, which was the second connected age, you had 2 things. You had phones and social networks. And now we basically could search, but we could also, and when search came, shopping came with Amazon, and then social and mobile came. Very important social company, Facebook. Very important mobile company, Apple. Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook are 4 of the 5 most valuable companies in America. And most of that value was all created in the last 10 years. But that was the second connected age. The first connected age is pages were connected to pages. The second connected age, we were all connected to each other through mobile and through social, and obviously search. All these modern companies like Airbnb and Dollar Shave Club came out because of that. And now we're about to enter the third connected age, which is the story that I'm going to end with. The third connected age is basically an age where data is connecting to data, which is artificial intelligence. For those of you who use Netflix, 70% of the time when you watch your next show, it's because Netflix has recommended it to you. Netflix did research that basically they throw away what you rate as what's good. They know what you like better than you know what you like. It's true. It's sad, but it's true. The machine knows better than you. 30% of all of Amazon's revenue comes from what they show you at the bottom after you have purchased something. A third. That, by the way, is AI. AI is simply data connecting to data. And that's the speed with which AI is advancing is so great that people like Bill Gates and Elon Musk are very worried that we will be put aside. The second new thing, so remember the first age was link connecting to links, which is search. Second was social and mobile. The third has 3 things. One is AI. The second is the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is going to be huge in sports because it's going to be the little sensors, which are going to be very smart, both in measuring, training, all kinds of stuff. It's coming in huge ways. The Apple Watch is nothing compared to what's happening. And many of you all know this because you're a specialist. But the Internet of Things. Now, the Internet of Things also happens to be your phone calling Uber. Because a thing, your phone, is calling a car. Right now, the car is attached to a person, the phone is attached to a person. In the future, the car may come by itself. Some people are worried that eventually the phone will say, we don't need you either, right? So that's sort of the second age. And the third is new ways of connecting, which is augmented reality, virtual reality, and voice. In America, 56 million homes already have an Alexa. The Alexa also listens to you, by the way. Okay, and sends data back. So it's a very interesting, amazing time to sort of learn that we're sort of basically living in. The implications for training, the implications on the people who you all are training is remarkable. The change is amazing. And by the way, I think I'm very positive about it because it all gives us godlike power. But gods can do bad things too, as we know from the Greek and other gods, right? So I will leave this with one key thing. We are all living in a magical time. And it's actually a very optimistic and positive time. There is a gentleman called Steven Pinker who basically has written a book called Enlightenment Now. And very often when we're listening to the news and we're listening to what's going on in the world and we're thinking about whichever side you are in the United States, in the political spectrum or any spectrum, you sometimes basically want to like shoot somebody, including yourself. The world is actually getting much, much better. But good news doesn't sell. Okay? The amazing technology that is going on is incredible. And when people say they're anti-science, my stuff is if you're anti-science, don't check yourself into a hospital when you're sick. That's when I know you don't believe in science. If you're anti-science, stop the candle. Don't put on electricity. Right? You can't be anti-fact, you can't be anti-rational because science is the future. And you all use science in swimming. You use science in everything. So I truly believe we're in the most amazing time. But what happens is, like anything else, when you learn best is when you are most challenged, and we're also challenged. And so I leave that basically saying you're at an amazing institution, going through amazing change, but hey, the future is only bright. Thank you. We have some time for questions if anybody has them. I think there are like a couple of mics set up there. If anybody has questions of any sort or any type, I will attempt to answer them. Do I see anybody? Left, right, center? No. Okay, so I will end with this. For those of you who do use social media or want to use social media, part of what I do is I try to educate people on what I see as some of the most interesting things going on. So for those of you who are on Twitter, I'm simply @Rishad, R-I-S-H-A-D. And it's my first name, second name when it's on LinkedIn. But this conversation can continue very simply utilizing the media that I've learned how to utilize in the last 10 years. Thank you.